A woman came out of a coma to tell the doctor she was meant to be a killer. However, no one believed she was being serious. Not until bones were found on her property. How many victims did she take the lives of? No one is sure. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about a woman who literally died, or said that she died, and said that she was meant to come back to be a killer. This one is extremely wild and a bit gruesome as well. I will warn you, it does do with childhood sexual assault, unfortunately. So if that's not something that you can handle at this moment, that's totally okay. There are many videos on my channel, many videos to come. I completely understand. Doing this is my absolute passion, so if you'd like to support me in that, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Let's keep this whole entire community kind and nice and just uplifting, because I think that there is a lot of negativity in this world, and I've seen it in my comments recently, and that's not something that I accept. That's not something that I approve of, and this community is going to be a safe, welcoming one, so please keep it that way. So thank you to Adventure Escape Mysteries for sponsoring this video. This is an app with so many mobile games all in one, and they're all surrounding mysterious things. There are things like escape rooms, you can solve mystery puzzles, you can investigate crimes, you can find treasure. It's all things that people who watch this channel are absolutely going to love, including myself. I love it. But you get to solve the mystery, complete the chapter, follow the clues, and become a top mystery solver. I really like that you get to test your deductive reasoning, your observation skills, all things that are very good to have in this crazy, scary world, but it does it in such a fun way. It's so immersive as well, which I absolutely love. It's all on your phone. It's been great to be able to just choose which ones you want, especially if you're someone who just wants one app on your phone that has multiple different games to choose from. It's perfect. So if you would like to download Adventure Escape Mysteries, click the link in my description, or just scan the QR code that will be here on the screen. And thank you to Adventure Escape Mysteries for sponsoring. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2006 in New Hampshire, and no one knew that there was a farm of horrors looming in the distance. It was a secluded property where not many traveled. However, those who did would never make it out alive. In March of 2006, 24-year-old Kenneth County Jr., who liked to go by Kenny, could not be located. Now, Kenny was born in 1981 in Massachusetts, and even though he was 24 and technically an adult who could do anything he pleased, he was said to have a childlike personality by his family. He was said to be mentally delayed with a learning disability and an IQ of about a 10-year-old, 11-year-old. It wasn't something that stopped him from being a good person or a functioning person, but he did have some troubles, and so oftentimes it was his family taking care of him. Now, his family adored him, and they did the best that they could to take care of him, though this would become difficult when he was younger, because his mother, Carolyn, would actually get into a car accident, and she was in a coma for quite some time. So she didn't get to spend a lot of the time when Kenny was young with him, and Kenny kind of went to different family members during that time. He was still said to turn out to be a very sweet boy, and when he got of age, he decided he wanted to join the army, and his family was not quite sure about this, but it was something he was very passionate about, and so this actually would give him a renewed confidence about himself, this ability to do things for himself, and it was really something that was good for Kenny. However, he would then be told that he actually wasn't graduating from the basic training to go on to be in the army or the military. And so it kind of set him back a little bit. He was a little bit down in the dumps after this, and Kenny would end up trying to take pills to take his own life, but thankfully that was unsuccessful and he did survive. Now, his family would have doted on him for the rest of his life. They did not have a problem taking care of him, being around him. However, they would not get the chance to. From the very beginning of this disappearance or this separation of Kenny from his family, his mother Carolyn did know where he was to a certain extent. She had said goodbye to him a month prior when he told her that he had a girlfriend, he was in love, and he was going to live with her and work on her farm that she had in Epping, New Hampshire. He said that they had a date that previous Valentine's Day, and it was a perfect match in Kenny's eyes. They just really connected, and Kenny's brother actually tried to stop him, saying, "This is not right. Something's wrong. This woman was actually double his age." And so he was saying, "Kenny, I think that you should stay. I don't think that you should go, especially with a woman that you met on a sex chat line." But Kenny said that she loved him, so he did leave. Now, after he moved in, Carolyn stopped getting messages or any sort of contact from Kenny, and she began to get worried. And so Kenny's family first called the Epping police on February 24th after they had already made a missing persons report in their own area of New Hampshire, and said to the Epping police, he is working on this farm with his girlfriend, and we need you to go check on him. Epping police surprisingly did do this, even though this was a man who was an adult, so technically he wasn't missing per se, because he could just go and do whatever he wanted. But they did go and check, and they went to this little farmhouse where they talked to his girlfriend through a window. And they said, we need to see Kenny to make sure he's okay. And the girlfriend said, "Actually, you can't right now. He's not home." And they pressed, saying, "He is technically a missing persons. We need to see him before we can leave." So finally she went to get him and said he was in the bath, and he came out wet, wearing a towel, but the police said everything looked okay. He looked completely fine. The officers were actually asked to leave at this time by the girlfriend, and his mother began calling again and again, trying to get a hold of Kenny, knowing that now he was okay, but he still wasn't answering. And so 2 days later, the actual girlfriend that was living with him at the farm ended up calling the police 3 times in Epping and telling them that they had no right to be on her property and that she wanted to see that missing persons report to make sure it was correct. She said that she would sue if anybody came back to her property. Now, Kenny did not make it to one of his family gatherings that he would always go to. His mother said that he was one that would show up early to family gatherings just to be there to meet everybody, to see everybody. And when he didn't show up at all, that's when she knew something was wrong, even if he was still seeming to be fine at this farm. However, the police said that their hands were tied. She had threatened to sue them if they were on her property, and they didn't have reasonable cause to be there at this point. But 17 days later, on March 17th, the Epping police would receive a call from the local Walmart. They were said to be called there due to suspicious behavior inside the Walmart, and that there was a suspicious person acting disruptively, kind of taking pictures of the person that they were with. And when they got there, they realized that this was actually this girlfriend as well as Kenny, but Kenny was in a wheelchair. Now, they did end up, making sure that Kenny and his girlfriend got home, and then they filed a report about this incident. But 5 days later, this girlfriend called the local police saying that the report was completely wrong, that they should have never made a report to begin with. And then she said that Kenny was no longer with her anyway, so it didn't matter. She said that he had moved out. Now, the next day, after hearing from the officers that Kenny was supposed to be going home, on March 23rd of 2006, Kenny's mother called back in to check on Kenny again. And his girlfriend told his mother that Kenny had left to go back to where they lived and that he would be there soon. Now, Kenny's mother immediately called the police after this, saying that Kenny was not one to really travel on his own. He would have at least told somebody where he was going and kind of, asked for help during that time, and he was not showing up at their door. So when she told officers this, they began trying to call the girlfriend once again, and it actually took till the next day to get a hold of her. They called her many times, left many messages, and she again told them Kenny was no longer there. But that is when something strange occurred, because she then began to play them a tape recording of Kenny's voice as well as hers. Now, this woman's voice that was heard was her own, and this was this girlfriend claiming that she was the justice of peace in New Hampshire. And then she began to ask Kenny if he was sexually assaulting children. And he said yes. At this point, she said, then were you sexually assaulted by a woman you have identified as your natural mother when you were a child? And again, he responded, yes. She then asked if his mother had sexually performed on him as a child, and he again said yes. They could then hear Kenny actually throwing up and then a thud as though he hit the ground. And that is when this woman, this girlfriend, said that Kenny was acting as though he had fainted. A little while later, you could hear Kenny hysterically crying and asking, why? Now, officers could not record this call in time, so all they had really was the memory of what they had heard when this woman had clicked play on this tape recording. Now, Kenny's mother, Carolyn, was obviously very upset at this. She denied any of those claims, saying that was so outlandish, the fact that she would do anything, but also the fact that Kenny would do anything either. But she and the officers quickly realized that it sounded more like Kenny was being forced to say these things. He sounded very robotic. He was only giving one-word answers. He didn't seem like this was his choice. And he still wasn't returning home, so the officers did decide to go back and search for him at this farm. And what they would find there would scare them all out of their dismissal of Carolyn's fears. Because at first it didn't seem like anything unusual. There was a large burn pile outside the farm, which is often used at farms to get rid of certain things. And so no one really paid attention to this at first. They went up, they were trying to knock on the door. No one was really answering, so that's when they just kind of began to ponder around, see if they could see anything outside. And so they went closer to this burn pile. And when they examined the fire, among the trash was something that appeared to be a bone. This bone had human flesh, or some sort of flesh, still attached to it. There was a knife handle, tree limb clippers, and a partially burnt chair, as well as I heard sneakers inside of this fire, not the typical random trash pieces that you would have. Officers would then rush to the door regardless of the locked door. In fact, they kicked it down. And at this point, when they were going inside, they began to hear screaming. And it wasn't coming from inside the home, it was actually coming from behind them. So they all swirled around and they saw a woman running at them from the opposite side of the road that they were on, kind of, in the bushes, as though she was almost hiding there. And this was Kenny's girlfriend and the supposed owner of this farm. She was running towards them. She was asking them what they were doing, what they thought that they were going to do, going into her home. And the police sergeant, who was Sean Gallagher, claimed that this woman told him that she was out shopping and that she had just returned home. And when she was asked where Kenny was, once again, she said he left days ago and she hadn't heard anything since. However, Sergeant Gallagher was not stopping the questioning there, and he bluntly asked her what in the world a bone was doing in the burn pile. And her answer was really not as expected, because she said, well, that's either a rabbit or a pedophile. She refused to elaborate on what in the world she meant by this, and when they asked her if they could take the bone with them, she refused and actually told them to leave her property. The officers did so, but they did come back the next day with a search warrant. Now, the owner of this home was 48-year-old Sheila LaBar, and the officers were quite, I was going to say fond of her. That's not the correct word. They knew her well, but they did not enjoy her presence. You see, it was all minor offenses that she was brought in for, but it was plenty of them. It was often, and she was said to just be a very odd character. She would get in trouble for arguing with neighbors, for disturbing the peace, for marijuana use, and speeding. But when they got to the farm the next day to retrieve the bone, it was already gone. They could not find it anywhere on the property, and so they began to actually search the property for more remains. However, they would find Sheila right in front of that burn pit, covered in ash from the fire, and they asked her, do you have any weapons on you? And she immediately gave them her gun. However, when they asked if she had any more, she decided to pull down her shirt, expose her breasts to the officers to tell them that she didn't have anything else. Now, everyone was taken aback, but those who knew Sheila knew that she was an odd lady, and in fact, officers would often go in like a pair or, a few officers when they talked to Sheila because they knew of this very strange behavior. You see, she had been born as Sheila K. Bailey on July 4th of 1958 in Fort Payne, Alabama. Now, she was actually the youngest of 6 kids, and her home life was said to be extremely difficult when she was younger. It was said that her father was an alcoholic, he was extremely violent, and she did graduate high school and ended up getting out of this house. Now, her ultimate dream was said to be a model or a country music singer, but eventually she would marry, and this was said to be because she just wanted to get out of town. She would marry a man named John Baxter, and John's daughter from another marriage, so Sheila's stepdaughter, who was Wendy, ended up telling her father that anytime he would leave them alone, Sheila would give her something to drink. And every time she drank this, she would be extremely tired and would end up going to sleep. Now, this marriage did not work out, obviously, and 5 years after she had graduated high school, Sheila would actually be admitted to a psychiatric facility after trying to take her own life. It was rumored that she struggled a lot with mental health, but especially in the marriage of her next husband, who was Ronnie Jennings. But Ronnie claimed that it was actually Sheila who caused all of the problems in their marriage, that she had violent mood swings that caused her to be psychotic at times. Now, her next relationship would be with a widowed doctor named Wilfred LaBar, who went by Bill. Now, Bill LaBar was 61 years old at this time, and she was 29 years old, and they had met over a Lonely Persons ad, and this was in 1987. And their relationship escalated quickly. Sheila moved into the farm that he owned. But they didn't actually get married. So Bill never became her third husband, and she never became his third wife. They were just living together as boyfriend and girlfriend, and Sheila really did take on his last name and acted as though they were together even though there was not a marriage. Now, like I told you, the police in the area knew Sheila well after she moved onto this farm, but it was never for really anything good. Many in the area were very conservative, and they could not help but stare at the way that she dressed. She was more just outspoken. She would wear small items of clothing. It just wasn't what everybody around her appeared to be. But, being different is not ever a bad thing. However, for Sheila's case, it was more than just dressing or speaking in ways that were different than what others would do in the community. It was just baffling, almost disturbing things that she would do. In fact, she would sometimes answer the door to, delivery drivers, officers, whatever, and she would be naked, or she would take off her robe that she was wearing while they were talking to her. She was even called a peeler by residents because she was often peeling off her clothes. Now, she wasn't said to make many friends around town, but she would often go out around town and kind of cause chaos wherever she went. She also was working with the animals on the farm as well as working at Bill's chiropractic office. In fact, she was said to be bullying some of the employees so much that they ended up quitting. And so it was really just her working there at that point. And then she began to bully the customers if they couldn't pay fully at that time, or if they just were late to the appointment. She would really make them feel horrible. After 8 years of living and being with Bill, Sheila would get married, but not to Bill. She was married to a man named Wayne Ennis. He had worked at the chiropractic office for a while, which is how they met, and Sheila and Bill were said to still be together. She was still living at the farm, and they were going great, but then she married this other man in 1995, and he moved onto the farm with them. The police knew that Bill and Sheila's relationship was not healthy anyways. They had often been called for domestic disputes there, and Bill once was seen with scratches all over his face. And it was unknown if Bill was okay with Wayne moving in with them or not, but he never kicked them off of his farm, or at least they never left the farm because of that, even if he tried. But the next year, Sheila and Wayne would get a divorce, and they both said that they were both abusive, and a year after that, Sheila actually got a restraining order against him, and she was still living on the farm with Bill. Now, Bill was actually asked during this time why he didn't kick her out, or why he didn't just break up with her, and he said that she had too much on him. Now, only 3 years later, in 2000, her boyfriend, her common law husband, the owner of the farm, Bill LaBar, ended up passing away at 74 years old. Now, she told his family he had a heart attack and that they needed to cremate him. Since Bill wasn't married, though, his children did believe that they would get all of his money, his belongings, his farm. But Sheila fought this, saying that she was his common law wife. Since they had been living together for so long, she was taking on his last name, and he had also given her power of attorney. So she ended up getting everything of his. When his children tried to fight this, they were told that they had a 50-50 chance of actually winning, and if they did, they would have to pump out like $50,000, so they didn't end up fighting. So in 2000, Sheila LaBar had an 150-acre farm all to herself. This wouldn't be for long, though, because she would bring in her next boyfriend, who was a man named James Brackett, and there were many more after that. But now she was being held responsible for the murder of Kenny County on that very farm. And again, Sheila was asked, "Where is Kenny?" Finally, she pointed to a duffel bag that was on one of the lawn chairs and said, "He's in that bag." When the officers opened it, they found what appeared to be many bone fragments, and she was immediately taken down to the police department. Now, when I told you that Sheila had a psychiatric stay after her attempted suicide, I did not tell you the whole story. You see, she had actually swallowed a bottle of pills before driving down the road and crashing, and so it was unknown if she would live. At this point, she was in a coma, and she remained there for more than a week. No one could have predicted who she would become when she woke up, though, because she would say some extremely strange things upon waking. And so she began to tell the doctors that she died during this time that she was in a coma, even though they had not recorded any death, and she'd gone to heaven. She was placed in a room with a lot of men with beards, one of them being God, and she was certain that he had spoken to her. She said that God had spoken to her and said that her work on earth was not done yet. Now, that in itself is not too strange if you believe in God, if you're very religious. However, that's not where the story ended, because Sheila began to say that the reason she was returning to earth was to kill pedophiles and perverts. She strongly believed that the reason she lived was to kill. She said she was an avenging angel, a protector of children, and little did they know she would actually go through with this. Now, while she was being questioned in Kenny's murder, she began to say that Kenny actually told her that he was a pedophile and that he had sexually assaulted many children. And the officers began to look into these claims, but they could not find any sort of evidence. And Sheila was saying at this point that she didn't know why the bones were on her property, that she was just being accused of murder. Now, you remember that time when the officers had seen Kenny and Sheila at the Walmart? Well, they had not seen Kenny just sitting there perfectly fine. They had seen him in a wheelchair, which was odd in itself. However, that was not all, because he was bruised, he was burned, he had an immobile hand, he had extremely pale skin, and they asked him if he was okay, and Sheila told him to shut the F up. At this point, she told officers that this was all due to a car accident they had recently had. He couldn't even get into the car by himself. Sheila had to help Kenny in. But what was she at the Walmart buying? Well, that was gasoline, the accelerant used for burn fire. But because the officers had seen this, had known how strange it looked, and just let them go, Kenny was now dead. But Sheila was released after only a few hours of questioning, while the bones were actually sent in for testing to see if it was human bone fragments. But a 3-week search would ensue on this farm, going over every single inch of the property. But it was said to be disgusting, that there was blood spatter everywhere, whether it was new, whether it was old. There was also an incinerated mattress as well, and that's when the test came back positive. These were human bones. From his army records, Kenny's DNA was tested and found to be a match. On April 1st of 2006, Sheila LaBar had a warrant out for her arrest. However, she was on the run from thousands of dollars from her account that she had withdrawn, and they had no idea where she was. They didn't know that she had cut and dyed her hair red, and she was going as far as she could possibly get to escape a murder conviction. However, a tip would come in the next day and she would finally be in custody. Now, during this time, officers would also find 3 human toes at the residence. Now, after Sheila's arrest, a woman did come forward saying that her son was missing as well. This was a man that was last seen alive a year prior to this, after he had moved in with Sheila LaBar. That was the last time he was ever seen. This was Michael DeLoge, and his mother was worried even back then that Sheila was trying to kill him. She hadn't seen or heard from him since, and Michael was a 37-year-old who had struggled with homelessness and addiction, and it was said that Sheila used that to lure him into a warm home with food on the table. In fact, his mother had gotten a letter from the farm saying not to contact them at all, and a recording was also sent to his mother where he accused her of abuse as a kid. When she continued trying to fight to find where her son was, Sheila claimed he had left. Sound familiar? This was almost just like what happened to Kenny. So these 3 human toes were tested against Kenny, but also against Michael. But they didn't belong to either. Now, officers began to find those tape recordings in the home, and they found 300 cassette tapes and over 1,000 hours of audio. And the audio was just like what was played to the officer over the phone of Kenny and Sheila, and it wasn't all Kenny that Sheila was talking to on these tapes. There was also Bill, possibly Michael, and other unknown men. Most of these tapes were Sheila manipulating these men into confessing to crimes, forcing them to, and saying that they had sexually assaulted minors. But they would also say that they were abused by their parents, though none of any of this was actually proven true. And these men sounded distraught, in pain, and as though they were forced to say these things. And it wasn't just a recording of a conversation, it was a recording of torture. And it appeared as though Sheila kept these for her own enjoyment. In 2008, even more evidence was found in the septic tank, where they found a birth certificate of Michael DeLoge. There was also a shell casing, and it was said to be bones inside as well. And with evidence of the murder of these 2 men, a trial did begin in May of 2008. Now, Sheila had tried to get the evidence thrown out of all of the searches of her home because she said it violated her rights. But this was denied, and evidence was taken to the courtroom. It was believed that Sheila killed Michael and then Kenny at her farm. And she did eventually confess to stabbing Kenny to death before burning his body, and then killing Michael, but never specified in what way, and then also burning his body as well. However, her story continued to change, and she ended up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, because Sheila's lawyer claimed that she was extremely mentally ill, that she could not differentiate between right and wrong, and she had undergone multiple psychiatric evaluations. And her defense believed that they should be able to argue lack of criminal responsibility, which is what New Hampshire has, instead of pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. They said to prove this, they would tell stories that Sheila had told them, where she once took a hatchet to the trailer of her boyfriend while he was sleeping to try to get inside, and then she claimed that she had a boyfriend run in a field while she shot at him. Now, Sheila's sister would testify that Sheila's upbringing was hard. It's one of those cases where there is very much correlation from her childhood to her kills, and that her father was not only violent but also sexually assaulted Sheila and the sister and their mother. And it wasn't just by her dad either, it was by his friends as well, and that she was the youngest, so she was more confused than anyone. She had no idea why this was happening to her. And Sheila's sister also said that while she was at a psychiatric facility after her suicide attempt, she said that an orderly did try to rape her.
Did she tell you anything about her experience in the psychiatric unit?
Yes, sir, she did.
What did she tell you?
She said that it was a horrendous experience, that one of the, and I believe she called him an orderly, but somebody that worked in there had tried to rape her. And she was just really upset about it, and nobody would listen to her, and she just basically had to fight for her life the 30 days she was in there.
This made a lot more sense as to why Sheila was claiming to be an avenging angel and that she wanted to kill pedophiles, and that she forced the men to say these things in order to kill them. She was almost using it as a way to feel better about her kills, almost in a Dexter sense, where if it's morally good killing, if it's of bad people, then it should be okay, even though it's very much still not. Being a killer vigilante is still being a killer. A psychiatrist testified after the multiple evaluations of Sheila that she was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and delusional disorder. And when the psychiatrist testified, he said that Sheila was populated in her childhood with people who did not protect her. And when he said this, Sheila actually started crying and had to be escorted out of the courtroom.
Well, it does in a general way, and I have indicated in my report, and I've said that I thought that she made some effort to destroy evidence, to kind of cover up evidence, but she did it in such a bizarre and disorganized and ineffective way as to reflect the psychiatric illness. To make the comment that the bone was either that of a rabbit or a pedophile in that circumstance, to me, conveys the reality of this delusional belief that she had and the presence of that.
She continued to claim, though, that both Michael and Kenny were pedophiles, and a witness testified saying that they were actually her neighbor, and they believed that she would force men into the trunk of her car, that she would keep them in cages on her property, and that there were tons and tons of men always coming after Bill died. They even once called the police for odd behavior after they had seen Sheila take a man down to her property. She had this long driveway, and then she would drive them back up to, the front of the driveway and dump them off, and they would be covered in bruises. In fact, they said that they specifically had seen Michael just absolutely in a horrible state, and they said, "What happened?" And all he said was Sheila. It was then theorized that the original owner of the farm and Sheila's common-law husband, Bill LaBar, could have been killed by her as well. Sheila's ex-husband, Wayne, who thankfully survived and who lived with Sheila and Bill, claimed that Sheila had asked him to kill Bill at one point, and he actually tried to go to Bill and say, your girlfriend, your wife, Sheila, is trying to kill you. And Bill ended up just taking him to a bus station and telling him to never come back. And when Bill died, Sheila wanted him cremated immediately, but the autopsy did determine his death to be a heart attack. Now, Bill's children claimed that Sheila was always threatening to shoot people, and they even had tried to stop their dad from getting into a relationship with her because they knew that she was a bad person. Sheila, though, denies killing Bill, and another ex of hers that I spoke briefly about, James Brackett, who was the boyfriend right after Bill had passed, well, he claimed that they were in an abusive relationship for 6 years. He was the one that was chased with the hatchet and the gun while she shot at him. He said that she even tried to run him over with a car, and eventually he ended up escaping. He ran away in a blizzard from this farm, and he never looked back. Now, the jury was taken to the farm as well as the Walmart to kind of look around to get a feel of where this all occurred, and Sheila was taken there as well with a stun belt so she couldn't escape. But Sheila was found sane enough to stand trial and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole twice for both murders. She was sent to the Homestead Institution in Florida, but she showed no emotion, which is something that we have really come to expect with these heartless killers. Now, it was believed that Sheila had more victims due to the sheer amount of blood that was found and some that did not match Michael or anyone that was surrounding this case, as well as the human toes that nobody knows who they belong to. And many people started to come forward saying that they knew people who had gone to work for Sheila or gone on a date with her and had never returned. It was found that Sheila had often met these men through either personal ads or dating websites, sex chat lines, or she would go out and she would find these homeless, vulnerable men. She would then become extremely sexual in order to lure them in, and she would use these dating sites where it was over the phone where you could leave a message for the person, and she would listen to the message, and if it sounded like this confident guy, she just hung up and didn't waste her time. It was the people who sounded more meek, like they could be manipulated. And after she got them to her farm, that's when the torture would begin, all under the false pretenses that Sheila had created of being this pedophile vigilante, that they were the embodiment of her childhood trauma, and that they really did not deserve to be on this earth anymore. But she would tell everybody else that they all left on their own free will. No bodies were actually found either, and it was believed that many were burnt in the same way that Michael and Kenny were, and that there was really no trace left. Now, Kenny's mother did file a lawsuit against the Epping police after they had seen Kenny in such a bad condition at that Walmart. However, this lawsuit was rejected in 2010. His mother was at the trial, and she said that she promised that Kenny would not be forgotten, that she would be able to give him justice because she wasn't even able to bury a body. There wasn't a body to bury. Now, Kenny's parents were actually divorced, but they came together during this trial to support Kenny and to support each other, and it was a very beautiful sight. Sheila did appeal her sentence, but it was denied. But how many victims do you think that Sheila had? Was Bill a victim? Did he really die of these natural causes, or because Sheila wanted his home? Do you think that Sheila could have been stopped from being a killer with some really good trauma therapy from her childhood? Because that is the thing, you know, we see killers that have these traumatic backgrounds and we say that's why it occurred. And it's true, it's so traumatic, it's horrible that these children have to go through what Sheila did. That's just, it's disgusting to even listen to. But there are so many people who go through just as bad or even worse, and they're beautiful people. They don't turn into these vicious, horrible killers. You can go one way or the other, and I believe you have a choice in that. But also, do you think that her car accident had something to do with it? Did she possibly have this severe head injury, this head trauma that we know can also cause these killers to be born after something either isn't connecting in the brain or something was traumatized in the brain physically? Do you think that Sheila would have been a killer if she didn't have this car accident? Do you think she actually saw something? I don't believe that she saw what she said she saw and that God would ask her to come back and, you know, kill pedophiles. But do you think that she in her mind, you know, had something that she believed was this experience? Or do you think she woke up and she decided she was going to be a killer and that was that? It's a very odd case. There's so many components that made or could have made Sheila into this killer, but again, it's no excuse. And there are some very traumatized people in this world who would never do this, who are the most beautiful souls, who make it their mission to help people instead of hurt people. But I want to know, do you think that Sheila really did believe she was this vigilante who was helping the world? Or did she know all along that she was forcing these men into admitting these things that were not true because she wanted to kill? And it didn't really matter who it was. You know, I think we talk a lot about cases about men who go after vulnerable women, such as sex workers. And I thought that this was just a case that, you know, we need to be aware of too, that it can happen the opposite way as well. I think that's the thing a lot of people want to say, women aren't as strong as men, they couldn't be serial killers. Well, a lot of the times it will start out with some sort of toxic relationship. And when that occurs, there is a brainwashing and manipulation that happens that is really more overpowering. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Send love to the victims and their families. I hope you learned a little bit about especially Kenny and Michael and James and what he went through. And Bill, I don't think we'll ever really know the truth about Bill, but I hope they are resting in peace. So yeah, don't forget to check out Adventure Escape Mysteries down below, and don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.